Welcome to FireTech Talk. I'm Sean Kelly, and today I'm meeting with Jake Bross, Business Development Manager at Brooks Equipment. We're going to be talking about fire extinguishers for special hazards. Jake, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's just get right to it. So, Jake, explain why aren't the ABC dry chemical fire extinguishers that are installed when a building first receives its certificate of occupancy always the best extinguishers for the building owner or tenant to use to protect their equipment or their employees, etc.?
Well, and they could be, but most of the time when fire extinguishers are installed, they're put in by the general contractor, right? So they're meeting a specification to meet minimum travel distance, pretty much as if the building was empty, unless it was spec'd otherwise. But for the most part, once the building owner moves in, move their equipment in, their processes, things like that, it's a call for, a more in-depth look at the fire protection in the building.
Okay, so it's basically the contractor's just meeting that minimum standard that's fairly generic, and you need to have some type of evaluation after the tenant moves in to determine if those are still the best fire extinguishers.
That's right, because the tenant could move in computers, servers, delicate electronic equipment. They could be moving in process type of equipment, 55-gallon drums of paint or alcohol, stacking mattresses 10 feet in the air. So each one of those things, may call for a different agent or more of them. So it's a perfect time to reevaluate after the building owner moves in.
Okay, that's a great segue. You mentioned there maybe a different agent is called for. So kind of just generally explain, why isn't ABC specific? Well, first off, what is ABC chemical, and why isn't it just a universal agent to be used for all applications?
Yeah, and I wish there was one agent that just did everything. There isn't one. And if anybody ever figures that out, it'll be a big deal. But 5 major classes, A, B, C, D, and K. No one extinguisher handles all of those things, right? And no one extinguisher does it without leaving a residue or creating some kind of a chemical reactivity or other challenge that we see in the line of work. So after we evaluate, we need to be able to say, what does the fire code call for, and what does the building owner and what they're trying to accomplish? What are they, how do they intersect, and can we satisfy both needs?
Great. So, satisfying needs and what's called for, I think one way that's referred to in the standards is special hazards. Okay. So explain to us, what are some common special hazards? Just walk us through that.
Yeah. When you think of, NFPA standard for minimums, I think of like a hallway in a hotel, right? I mean, there's not a lot going on there. There's not a lot of, friction or hazards or storage or anything like that. So you'll see an extinguisher every, 150 feet, 75 to 150 feet. And that'll be a standard, multi-purpose dry chemical. But, when you think of all the other things that happen in a workplace, right, from chemical plants to, data centers and all of these other places, there's so many different agents that can meet needs and meet code. So really, when we evaluate that, NFPA has some guidance on delicate electronics, for example. We don't want to use multi-purpose dry chemical on that. And you asked before, what is ABC dry chemical? Well, ABC it's a yellow powder. It's a microfine dust, very, very small particles, less than 5 microns. So, I mean, it's extremely small particles. It's kind of like flour. If you can think of a 10-pound bag of flour under 195 psi in a metal canister, it's designed to go everywhere, and it makes a big mess. It's great at putting a fire out. But again, if you can imagine, I was doing an inspection years ago when I was in the field in a place that manufactured ice cream. And you can imagine what setting off one of those extinguishers in a place like that would do, right? I mean, that you have to stop production, tear everything down, clean it, take it apart. And again, this is the downtime that we're also concerned with now with special hazards. So years ago when I worked in the field, we were always hearing about what would it cost to replace that computer equipment? Now it's not so much the cost of the equipment, it's what the equipment is doing. So if it's a server that's processing international bank transactions 24 hours a day, this could be a multi-million-dollar downtime for them. So these are the things that all factor into, the selection of an agent. So, when you think of ABC dry chemical, again, it's there for the basic type protection, and it's also cost effective for that. But when you get into manufacturing or chemicals or delicate type of operations, it just calls for deeper evaluation. I've seen places that have fire stations now. It's a 4x8 sheet of plywood painted red, and there's maybe 3 or 4 extinguishers lined up on it, and each one of them have different ratings. So, this all ties back to training. You can put all kinds of extinguishers in place, but if the employees who are expected to use them aren't trained on how to use them and why we're using this particular agent, you're not going to be as effective.
Well, we're definitely going to cover training. That's a good point. Before we get there, you just brought up a couple of different, fire hazards, special considerations. So let's go now a little bit more detailed. What would you recommend for some of those? So let's start with, it's an interesting one, right? So we don't want ABC to be a topping on ice cream. Right. So what would you recommend in an application where it's food and processing?
Yeah, you can use a clean agent in some cases. We have clean agent extinguishers that don't leave a residue, right? So it's a liquefied gas under pressure. It's expelled as a vapor, and it doesn't leave a residue. So you can spray it directly into live computer equipment, live electronics, and it doesn't create any damage and it doesn't have any downtime. And those extinguishers are probably in some of the most expensive extinguishers we offer in the industry. But there are other options. For example, CO2. CO2 doesn't have an A rating to meet minimum travel distance for NFPA standard, but you could have the frame of the building, for example, set up, or the beams set up with ABC, multi-purpose, and have CO2 in that immediate operations area, right? So there's other ways that you can meet those standards. Water mist is another extinguisher that has a full electric rating over 100,000 volts, but it also has an A rating, so you can meet the minimum travel distance. It just doesn't have a B rating if there's flammable liquids in the area. So we have about 10 different agents that we can select. And an NFPA steers us in some directions. When we have, for example, pressurized flammable liquids, the NFPA standard calls for not only a specific agent, they're asking for, they mentioned that potassium-based agents are the best for that, so the purple K powder. But in addition, they want high flow agents, right? So they want extinguishers that have more power and can throw the agent further and keep the operator at a safe distance. And Purple K just happens to work great on pressurized flammable liquids. So there are specific points in NFPA 10 that call those things out.
Okay. Well, I can envision a scenario where, you go and you evaluate what your customer, your client's operations look like. And maybe your company hadn't always had the account for that customer. And so you're done with your evaluation and you're recommending that, several ABC extinguishers at different points be replaced with CO2 or water mist or halotron. How do you overcome that objection from the customer who's like, well, hey, the other guy never said anything about this?
No, I've been there many times, and some of the objections you might get, or if you're new to the account, but the company you work for has been in there for 10 years, and that's a difficult conversation.
Wow, yeah, I bet.
But again, it's a matter of having a fresh set of eyes on it, right? Again, if the building was outfitted by the general contractor and it has the standard units. And that's not to say it might not have been brought up in the past, and maybe it fell on deaf ears, or maybe it didn't get followed up on to the level that brought that sense of awareness to it. But yeah, you're going to get those kind of things, and just know as a service tech that I'm equipped with my knowledge of the NFPA, and now after having been through the facility, I also understand what you do here, Mr. Customer. So I'm this is what I'm basing this on. Here's the references from NFPA. I wasn't always great at sales when I first started. I always relied on that FPA standard as a crutch. Don't take my word for it. Read it right here, right? So I made copies of different references, and and also to use the data sheets on the extinguishers themselves, because again, manufacturers know what they're trying to accomplish with those. So that's great material to leave with them. But calling those things out and giving some options. For example, we mentioned the ice cream place, or it could be a data center. That if we use CO2, if we use water mist, if we use some other options, and they land at varying prices, right? And in the in your pricing schedule. So it's not always a fun conversation to have. But again, I think if you do it due diligence and you explain where you're getting this from, it's going to make a lot of sense. Another scenario is when they say the fire official was just here, he didn't say anything. I've heard that 1,000 times. Maybe,
yeah, just a few.
Yeah, and really what I always responded, look, if I'm a fire chief, I'm coming to inspect your building. I'm thinking about sending my men into this building in a case of we're responding to a live fire event, and I'm looking for extension cords and trip hazards and space heaters and storage in front of the electrical panels and things like that. But when it comes to, has the extinguisher been serviced? Has the sprinkler system been serviced? They rely on us with our state licensing, and they see that tag and they say, okay, they're up to date. I can move on to other things. So most people in the fire protection business take that very seriously. They know that you're never going to hear a fire marshal come in and say, I think you need to have this size and type and weight and everything else of extinguishers, because again, I think they have larger concerns when they're going into a building. So they really do rely on us, and as well as the customers. So.
That's an important point. Jake, thank you so much for joining us. It looks like we're out of time today.
Thanks for having me.
Be sure to like and subscribe, and keep a lookout for part 2.